May 23, 1972, 3:17 p.m. John Lennon's apartment, Bank Street, Greenwich Village, New York. John Lennon stands in his living room, staring at a brown paper package that arrived with the afternoon mail. The package bears no return address, only his name written in handwriting that makes his blood run cold. The precise, elegant script belongs to Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager who died 5 years ago in his London flat, officially from an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it. But dead men do not write letters. Dead men do not know his current address in New York. Dead men do not send packages through the United States Postal Service. John's hands shake as he turns the package over, examining the postmark. London, May 18, 1972. 5 days ago. He checks the return address space again, finding only a smudged ink mark that could be a postal stamp or something more deliberate, something designed to obscure the true origin of this impossible correspondence. The apartment feels smaller suddenly, the afternoon sunlight filtering through Greenwich Village windows seeming harsh and invasive. John has spent 2 years in New York trying to escape the surveillance that followed him from London, trying to build a life where his political activities and personal relationships exist without constant documentation by people who view his music as a threat to national security. But this package suggests that escape is an illusion, that some connections transcend death, that some secrets refuse to stay buried. Yoko is at her art studio, will not return until evening. John is alone with this impossible package and the terrible certainty that opening it will change everything he believes about Brian's death, about his own safety, about the forces that have been shaping his life since the Beatles became too successful to ignore and too influential to trust. He sets the package on a coffee table, walks to the window, looks down at Bank Street. The neighborhood appears normal. Mothers pushing strollers, students carrying books, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets. But John has learned to see beneath normal appearances, to detect the surveillance teams that follow him to recording studios, to peace rallies, to grocery stores where he buys milk and bread like any other New York resident. A dark sedan sits at the corner, engine running, 2 figures visible in the front seats. The car has been there since morning, replacing the blue sedan that occupied the same spot yesterday, which replaced the gray sedan from the day before. Different vehicles, same purpose, documenting his movements, his visitors, his mail delivery. John returns to the coffee table, picks up the package, weighs it in his hands. Light enough to contain papers, heavy enough to contain several documents. The right size for letters, photographs, or reports. The wrong size to contain explosives, though that thought crosses his mind as he considers who might benefit from sending him parcels that appear to be from dead men. He tears open the brown paper carefully, preserving the handwriting for later analysis, though he already knows with sickening certainty whose hand formed those familiar letters. Inside the brown paper, a manila envelope, and inside that, 3 handwritten letters on cream-colored stationery bearing the letterhead of EMS Enterprises, Brian's management company. The first letter is dated August 20th, 1967, 8 days before Brian's death. "My dear John," the letter begins, and immediately John hears Brian's voice, the careful pronunciation, the slight lisp that made his speech distinctive, the formal courtesy that masked deep affection for the 4 young men whose careers he had guided from Liverpool clubs to global phenomena. If you are reading this, then the precautions I have taken have proven inadequate, and the people who have been pressuring me have succeeded in silencing me permanently. I want you to know that my death, however it may appear, will not have been an accident. John sits heavily in his armchair, the letter trembling in his hands. The handwriting is unmistakably Brian's, the voice authentic, the tone carrying the weight of someone who knows he is writing his own obituary. For the past 6 months, I have been contacted repeatedly by representatives of various government agencies who are concerned about the Beatles' influence on young people, particularly your political statements and anti-war activities. These contacts began as requests for information about your personal politics, your associations with radical groups, your financial support for anti-war organizations. John remembers 1967, the year the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper, the year they began using their platform to advocate for peace, to question authority, to encourage young people to think independently about war and violence, and the institutions that profit from both. He remembers Brian's increasing nervousness during that period, his reluctance to book television appearances, his insistence that they avoid making political statements during interviews. Initially, I believed I could protect the Beatles by providing minimal cooperation with these. I shared basic information about your schedules, your recording plans, your business activities. Nothing personal, nothing that could be used against you. But the demands escalated rapidly. The letter continues, describing how Brian was pressured to install recording devices in Abbey Road studios, to monitor private conversations between band members, to report on their political discussions and personal relationships. How he was threatened with prosecution for tax evasion, with exposure of his homosexuality, with charges that would destroy his reputation and career if he refused to cooperate more extensively. By early 1967, I was functioning more as an intelligence agent than as your manager. Every conversation I had with any of you was documented and reported. Every business decision was scrutinized for its potential political implications. Every creative choice was analyzed for its capacity to influence public opinion against government policy. John sets down the first letter, walks to the window again. The dark sedan has been joined by a second vehicle, a van with tinted windows parked across the street. More surveillance, more documentation, more evidence that his life continues to be monitored by people who view his existence as a security threat requiring constant management. He returns to the coffee table, picks up the second letter, dated August 25th, 1967, 3 days before Brian's death. The pressure has become unbearable. This letter begins, Brian's handwriting more hurried now, less carefully controlled. They're demanding that I convince you to end your political activities, to stop making statements about Vietnam, to cease funding anti-war organizations. They want me to use my influence over the Beatles' career to control your political expression. John remembers the meetings Brian had requested during late August 1967. The urgent phone calls about important business matters, the canceled appointments that Brian claimed were due to scheduling conflicts, but which now appear to have been attempts to arrange conversations about political restrictions. I have told them that I cannot and will not manipulate the Beatles' artistic or political choices. My responsibility is to protect your creative freedom, not to limit it. But they have made it clear that my refusal to cooperate more extensively will have consequences. The letter details specific threats. Brian's business license would be revoked, his financial assets frozen, his personal relationships exposed in ways designed to destroy his social standing and professional reputation. More disturbing, the threats extended to the Beatles themselves. Visa problems for international tours, tax audits, drug charges, immigration difficulties. They have shown me files, John. Thick files containing detailed information about all of you. Your personal relationships, your financial transactions, your private conversations, your psychological profiles. They know things about your lives that could be used to destroy you if you continue to oppose government policy. John feels a chill that has nothing to do with the afternoon air conditioning. These files Brian described still exist somewhere, still contain information that could be weaponized against him, still represent ongoing threats to his safety and freedom. Most importantly, they have made it clear that your safety, all of your safety, depends on your political compliance. They have shown me intelligence reports about groups that consider the Beatles dangerous enemies of traditional values. Right-wing organizations, religious extremists, political fanatics who view your influence as a threat to their vision of American society. The letter concludes with Brian's plan to resist the pressure, to find lawyers who could challenge the surveillance, to expose the government harassment through media contacts who might be willing to publish the truth about intelligence operations against popular musicians. I will not be your jailer, John. I would rather die than become the instrument of your creative control. John picks up the third letter, dated August 27th, 1967, the day before Brian's death. They have decided I am unreliable. The letter begins, the handwriting now shaky, desperate. This morning I was contacted by someone who made it clear that my continued resistance to their demands has made me a security risk rather than a security asset. John's hands are shaking now as he reads Brian's final words, written in the knowledge that he had hours or days left to live. I have been told that my death will appear to be an accidental overdose. They have detailed knowledge of my prescription medications, my history of depression, my previous suicide attempt. They have created a narrative that will make my death appear inevitable, tragic, but not surprising. Brian describes being given a bottle of pills, told they were sleeping medication, but warned that taking more than 2 would be fatal. The message was clear: cooperate completely or face the consequences of an accidental overdose that would eliminate a problematic witness while maintaining plausible deniability. I am writing this in the hope that someone will eventually understand the truth about my death and take appropriate precautions to protect themselves. The people who are controlling this operation have resources, influence, and the willingness to eliminate anyone who threatens their objectives. The letter ends with specific warnings for John. Your political activities have made you their primary target. Your influence over young people terrifies them. Your willingness to challenge authority represents everything they are trying to prevent. You are in more danger than you realize, and that danger extends to anyone close to you. John sets down the final letter, sits in silence for several minutes, absorbing the implications. Brian Epstein, the man who discovered the Beatles, who guided their career from Hamburg clubs to international stardom, who protected them from exploitation and manipulation, was murdered by intelligence agents who viewed his loyalty as an obstacle to their control. And now, 5 years later, John is receiving Brian's posthumous warnings through channels that suggest the same people who killed Brian are still monitoring his activities, still capable of intercepting his mail, still able to deliver messages that demonstrate their continued power over his life. John walks to the phone, considers calling the police, the FBI, the media. But Brian's letters make clear that official channels are compromised, that the people responsible for his death have institutional protection, that exposing the truth will only accelerate the timeline for John's own elimination. He thinks about the dark sedans that follow him through Manhattan, the recording equipment discovered in his previous apartments, the immigration proceedings that have been used to control his political activities, evidence of ongoing surveillance, ongoing pressure, ongoing threats that confirm the accuracy of Brian's warnings. At 4:30 p.m., John hears footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving slowly, deliberately, stopping outside his door. He looks through the peephole, sees 2 men in dark suits examining his door number, checking papers in their hands. John steps away from the door, his heart racing. These are not postal workers or building maintenance personnel. These are people who know about the package delivery, who are here to gauge his reaction, to determine whether Brian's posthumous communication has achieved its intended effect. The footsteps move away from his door, continue down the hallway. But John knows they have not left the building, knows they are positioning themselves to monitor his activities, to document his responses, to report on his emotional state to supervisors who will decide whether additional action is necessary. John returns to the coffee table, gathers Brian's letters, considers his options. He could destroy the evidence, pretend the package never arrived, hope that ignorance will provide some protection. He can contact lawyers, journalists, politicians who might be willing to investigate Brian's allegations. Or he can accept that Brian's death was a warning, that his own continued political activism will result in similar consequences, that survival requires abandoning the very activities that make his life meaningful. The phone rings. John stares at it, knowing that answering will connect him to people who are aware of the package delivery, who want to gauge his psychological state, who are prepared to escalate pressure if necessary. He lets it ring. 12 times, 15 times, 20 times. Finally, it stops. At 5:15 p.m., Yoko returns from her studio, finds John sitting in the darkened living room, Brian's letters scattered on the coffee table. "What's wrong?" she asks, sensing the change in atmosphere, the weight of discovery and fear. "Brian didn't die from an accidental overdose," John says quietly. "He was murdered because he refused to help the government control the Beatles." Yoko examines the letters, reads Brian's warnings about surveillance, about threats, about the ongoing danger to John's safety. Her face grows pale as she absorbs the implications. "What do we do?" she asks. John looks at her, this woman he loves, this artist whose own immigration status has been used as leverage to control his political activities. He thinks about their future together, about the possibility of having children, about the dream of creating art without constantly looking over their shoulders for people who view creativity as subversion. "We disappear," he says finally. "We stop making political statements. We stop funding anti-war organizations. We become private citizens instead of public figures. For how long? Forever." Yoko nods, understanding that survival requires sacrifice, that love sometimes means choosing safety over principles, that Brian Epstein's death has redefined the parameters of their lives. That evening, John burns Brian's letters in the fireplace, watching 5 years of suppressed truth dissolve into smoke and ash. Outside, the surveillance vehicles maintain their positions, documenting his activities, reporting his compliance to people who have successfully transformed murder into behavioral modification. But late that night, after Yoko falls asleep, John writes a letter of his own. A letter to be opened only in the event of his death, detailing everything he knows about Brian's murder, about the ongoing surveillance, about the forces that treat artistic expression as a national security threat requiring lethal response. He seals the letter, addresses it to a journalist he trusts, arranges for its delivery only if he fails to contact the holder within specific timeframes. Insurance against silence. Protection against the kind of disappearance that made Brian Epstein's truth seem impossible until it arrived in a brown paper package 5 years after. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Some truths survive, even the people who try to suppress them. And sometimes the dead find ways to warn the living about dangers that transcend mortality, about forces that treat human life as expendable when it threatens institutional power. John Lennon will spend the next 8 years of his life balancing on the edge between truth and safety, between artistic integrity and survival, between the person he wants to be and the person he must become to protect the people he loves. But Brian's warning has been delivered, has been understood, has been accepted. The price of truth has been calculated, and John has decided that some prices are too high to pay, some fights too dangerous to continue, some victories too costly to pursue. The surveillance will continue. The files will grow thicker. The threats will remain unspoken but understood. And John Lennon will transform himself from a political activist into a private citizen, trading his voice for his life, his principles for his safety, his power for his survival. Because Brian Epstein, speaking from beyond death, has shown him the cost of resistance. And that cost is everything. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it.